Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm really excited to have the opportunity to connect with you and talk about what was a really exciting weekend that just passed. I was tremendously honored to have been invited by the Sanders Institute to take part in their first ever gathering with the goal of bringing progressives together from the US and from around the world to discuss ideas, to discuss ways of organizing, to discuss what the future should and must look like, and also to launch Progressive International, a new organization that's been launched. It was launched over the weekend by Jane Sanders and Yanis Varoufakis, and this new organization presents a very exciting opportunity for us as progressives to connect with each other, to build networks, to build solidarity, and to learn from one another. As we go forward in pursuit of social, environmental, and economic justice. And I want to share with you some of the things that we learned while we were there at the Sanders Institute gathering in Vermont. For me, it was very clear that we're not alone. We're not alone here in Canada and other parts of the country as we face immense challenges. Challenges like growing inequality, challenges like catastrophic climate change, challenges like the rise of violence, hate, fascism, misogyny, racism. And so many people that were there over this past weekend shared, the obstacles that they are up against, that their communities are up against, that our world is up against. And it was clear that we are not alone. And in connection with that, what was also made very clear is that we need to work together to address these challenges in our communities, but we also need to work together to address these challenges globally, like climate change, that we need to work together. And one of the things that was brought up constantly is that the right does work together, that the Donald Trumps of this world, that people like Doug Ford, people like the right-wing authoritarian leaders that are emerging around the world are working together, are learning from each other, and in order to fight their politics and to challenge what they are saying and doing, that we also as progressives need to work together. And so a resounding theme was, think globally and act locally. But I would also say connect and find ways to act globally as well. But what was very inspiring to me was the fact that so many people felt that there are ways of that we have to work together, and that there are incredible ways of working together as well. I would say that one of the things that was also important for me was to demystify the myths about Canada. There's a lot of people that talked about Canada being a model, people excited about what Canada does, and given what's happening in the States, if you're looking from afar, it's not hard to understand why people would be looking to us. But I talked about the fact that we have a prime minister in our country, Justin Trudeau, who, despite the rhetoric of around climate change, is actually contributing to climate change in a whole host of ways, including by nationalizing a pipeline that will contribute, in terms of our carbon emissions and obviously to climate change. We talked about how we have a prime minister who has an anti-worker agenda, and most recently the fact that he legislated postal workers back to work. And actually, while I was there, I had the opportunity to connect with Mark Diamondson, the president of the American Postal Workers, who knew exactly the struggle that was being waged here at home. And we did a video where he expressed his solidarity for postal workers. And for me, it was very important to talk about how, even when we talk about healthcare, that a lot of Americans are fans of, in terms of the idea that we have healthcare. I said we have healthcare, but we don't have the kind of Medicare for all vision that Bernie Sanders and others are fighting for. We don't have pharmacare, we don't have dental care, and even our healthcare has come under attack in recent years because of austerity, because of privatization and cuts. And so we do have a lot to fight for here in our own country. And we can, we can take inspiration even from the States when it comes to the fight for Medicare for all, when it comes to the fight to, against climate change. And I know a lot of people were saying that they look to Canada and particularly the courageous leadership of so many Indigenous leaders in the fight against pipelines and in the fight for environmental justice. So there's a lot we can learn from each other, and it's really important that we also share our reality here in Canada, and that there's a lot to fight for here. In fact, I talked about the fact that Canada is becoming more unequal, and in some ways even more unequal than the United States. So we have our work cut out for us without question. So I want to get to some of the questions that were shared with us that that people shared with us. Jody, hi Jody. Jody shared the question, I learned that we are not alone as progressives. As the conference made clear, it is all interconnected. But I'm with Bernie, and the first priority needs to take on the concentration of capital. I really thank you, Jody, for that comment, and you're absolutely right. A critical focus that connects to climate change, that connects to rising authoritarianism and fascism, frankly, is the need to take on the concentration of capital, and essentially to take on the wealthy, or as Bernie refers to them as the billionaires, who are not just concentrating wealth, but also concentrating power, and are waging that power in such a way that benefits them more and more, and exploits and pushes back everybody else. And actually it was a moment there in the panel with Bernie Sanders and Yanis Varoufakis, as well as Ada Colau, the mayor of Barcelona, and Jeffrey Sachs. Bernie Sanders in that panel said, it's good to talk about all of these issues, but unless we are addressing inequality, and unless we're taking on the CEOs, the billionaires who are running the show, then we're not really getting to the issues, and when we're not fighting back the way we ought to. In fact, he actually said, a lot of there's a lot of CEOs who are pro-choice and have gay friends and maybe nice people, but that doesn't mean that they are pushing forward a political agenda that is leading to more and more people being worse and worse off. So fighting inequality means taking on the billionaires, taking on the wealthy, and that's something that I believe is critical as well here in our own country. So we have another question from Isaac. Why do you think conservatives can stick together so much better than leftists? Thank you for that, Isaac. I mean, that actually did come up in some of the discussions as well. I remember one of the speakers talked about how increasingly you're seeing the right and right-wing populists, as they call themselves, really appeal to people's emotions and hurt, rather than sticking to facts. Because the facts don't back up what they have to say, and of course we know of Donald Trump's fake, the way he doesn't actually stick to the truth and lies about a lot of the things that he says, and it's clear to me that when we talk about one of the things that I've been thinking about is we talk about right-wing populists, so these right-wingers that claim to be on the side of the people. They can't be. I mean, their policies, their actions go right against the well-being of people. Their actions benefit the 1%. Their actions benefit their wealthy friends. And whether it's their politics of division, of xenophobia, of racism, of fascism, they are pushing forward an agenda that make people worse off in so many ways. So they aren't representing the people, and yet the leaders in these movements are like I said, connected, are learning from each other, and capitalizing on this sense of disenfranchisement, on this sense of marginalization that so many people are feeling, people that are losing their jobs, people that are struggling in poverty, people that are falling further and further behind. And I think that's the way they're approaching it, and hence that's how they're staying connected. But I think it's really critical for us to connect with people on the challenges they're facing, and make it clear that the inequality they're facing is not because of immigrants or because of other communities. The inequality we're facing is because of the decisions that our governments are making that benefit the wealthiest in our country. Neoliberal policies that benefit the status quo and those that already have, and make the rest of us worse off. And so I think we need to do a better job at building solidarity, and that's why I'm really excited about what Progressive International presents to us as an opportunity. So we got a really good comment by email from Chris. There are many challenges facing the world, and I've got great concerns for the future, for people and other creatures on this world. Clearly, we have to figure out how to organize people to counteract the Cambridge Analytica, the corporate media, to push for true democracy and governments committed to fairly promoting the quality of life of all people. The most critical is dealing with climate change and war. We can only do that if we can make changes in governance at all levels, including the world. A clear challenge is that governments are national while corporations are international. We must reform the UN, get rid of the Security Council, set up more democratic General Assembly with more power, pressure all nations to adopt the Swedish constitutional clause, which states, quote, military service persons on active duty may only leave Swedish soil to act as UN peacekeepers, unquote. We should demand the immediate dismantling of all nuclear weaponry, pressure all nations to subsidize alternative energy options and increase taxes on fossil fuels. And in Canada, we need a democratic election system, a much more powerful and progressive CBC to counteract the corporate media. And Chris says in the end that I was in Spain in 1938 and had a Guernican experience, has spent much time thinking about the issues that affect the lives of all people since then. I fully support what you're doing, Bernie's and others' initiatives. Well, thank you so much, Chris. And thank you for sharing your vision, a vision that so many of us share when it comes to a progressive politics and a progressive world. I think you touched on critical points, and I just want to pick up on pushing for more democracy and calling our institutions into account. A very clear message from this weekend was the need to push for change in many ways, including at the ballot box. And people like Bernie Sanders, people like Nina Turner, like Tulsi Gabbard, people that, there was a school trustee from San Francisco. There were legislators from all levels of government there, and they talked about the importance of supporting candidates and supporting movements in elections that are putting forward a progressive agenda, and so that we can pursue political change at all levels and in different ways. And that's something that I think is so important for us to work on here in Canada, making sure that our progressive ideas, that our progressive candidates and voices are being supported and are winning in elections. And the other piece I want to pick up on was on the media concentration. Thank you for bringing that up, Chris. It came up a lot this past weekend. And again, I talked about how Canada, not unlike the US, suffers from the impact of corporate media concentration, and the silencing of progressive and left voices. It was really cool to see a number of independent media outlets there, and hear from them, the Young Turks, Common Dreams, The Real News, and others, and Democracy Now! And it's clear that we need to find ways of getting our messages out there online and through progressive means, so that we can find ways to connect and we can find ways to fight back, including against the corporate media. And Jody, I know you already you shared a message about bringing it back to our reality here in Canada. Today is December 6th. Obviously, a very somber day for our country. It's the day that we remember the murdering of 14 women at École Polytechnique in Montreal in 1989, and today we think about the fact that they were killed because they were women. We think about the fact that misogyny was the reason they were killed, but also the fact that misogyny still exists exists today and often manifests itself in the killing and obviously violence against women, including the threat of the targeting of women in politics and in public office, and I would say especially progressive women who speak out. And I think that what we saw in some of the things we were hearing this past weekend, and I've certainly seen this to be the case here in our own country, is that a lot of times it is women who are leading the fight against power, that are leading the fight against climate change. And I think of all the Indigenous women who are at the forefront of this fight. A lot of young women are taking on the big challenges of our time: inequality and climate change. And you're talking about educating women and how they can help lead to a decentralization of capital and power. Obviously, structures that have been created by men and are often run by a majority of men, but there's also some women thrown in the mix as well. But it's clear to me that if we support feminist women, feminist leaders, activists, advocates in politics and in our community, that we can take on the challenges ahead of us, that we can make a difference. And this weekend there was some incredibly inspiring women who are doing that work in the States and around the world in their own communities. And I think of the work of the mayor of Barcelona. I think of the work of a number of American politicians and women politicians, and we have so much to learn from, and I think a lot of incredibly inspiring feminist women and progressives here in our country that we need to be supporting. Question from Ken. Right on, but how do we get elected? Well, I will say, Ken, that first of all, we do have a federal election coming up, so here's an opportunity ahead of us. But look, I mean, whatever level of government, school board, municipal, provincial, and federal, we do need progressives. We need people that are willing to put forward bold, inspiring ideas, for today, for tomorrow, at all levels of government, and we need to back these people up. I'm really proud of the kind of the people that I get to work with in the NDP and in grassroots movements who are doing this work. And sometimes it's clear to me that there's a really exciting work happening in one side of the country that others might not know in another side of the country. And for me, it's been important to make those connections and to build the relationships and ultimately a movement where we can support each other. And and I think that there's a real effort to do that in the lead up to the federal election, to support progressives, to support a progressive vision, and I think part of that is by connecting with Progressive International, but a big part of that here in our own country is connecting with each other and supporting these candidates, encouraging these candidates to run, building a strong, bold platform, and then going out there and doing the work of organizing, of campaigning, of outreach at the grassroots level. Got a question from Ali. We saw the shift in Brazil. Too many questions. What went wrong? Well, I think there's a lot to talk about from the Brazilian perspective, and I wish we had somebody from the ground there to talk about it. There was one of the candidates that challenged the now president was at the event in Vermont as well. And we briefly had an opportunity to talk about how frightening the politics that the current Brazilian president is putting forward are, openly attacking indigenous peoples, openly in support of torture, openly encouraging fascist politics. It is tremendously frightening. We do know that there's been attack on the left there, an attack on working people. Obviously, the targeting of Lula, the former president, the way in which the media and of course the judiciary have been involved in that. So clearly there's a lot involved, but ultimately a real attack of working people and of those in an attempt, very concentrated attempt to attack or to silence those on the left who are speaking out. And I think it's really important that that we hear from those who did stand up, and the Brazilian politician was Mr. Haddad, and that we support them and support their resistance. We can do that, I think, from Canada. There's different ways, and I'm sure we're going to be hearing more about that help. And we can certainly call our own government to account that hasn't openly been critical of Brazil's politics. And we, of course, saw the media heralding the rise of the right there as well, the Canadian media. So we should be calling them to account as well. So again, there's so many ways of connecting globally. And it's a clear reminder of the fact that, we're not immune to these politics, and that we need to be constantly vigilant and constantly working to advance an agenda that is pro-worker, that is pro-justice, and that is progressive. So we have a question from Tiana. How can we empower and help more young people mobilize to fight for progressive values? I know a lot of young people feel very disenfranchised and hopeless when it comes to politics. So Tiana, because I know who you are, I want to thank you for your involvement in progressive politics and the work that you've done to build a movement around bold progressive politics. There are many young people across the country that are doing that right now, and we need to support you. We need to support them, whether they're running for nominations, whether they're building campaigns, whether they're on the front lines of fighting climate change. Whether they are, involved in the fight for 15, the fight against anti-worker legislation, provincially, federally. We need to listen to young voices. We need to create space for young voices, and ultimately we need to help them get elected. And I talked about this at the gathering, the Sanders gathering. We talk about the world being at a crossroads. Well, let's be clear. It's the millennial generation and the generations coming up now that are at the crossroads. We are the ones that are facing inequality, the likes we've never seen before in our countries. We are the ones that are facing the impacts, current and future, will be facing the future impacts of catastrophic climate change. We are the ones that are seeing violence and rise in our own generation in an extremely frightening way, and so we have to be the ones. We are the ones fighting back, and we have to be the ones that are being supported, and we need people of all generations to work with us and to support us in our fight back. And that's one of the reasons why I'm such a big fan of Bernie Sanders as well. Obviously, everybody knows that, because though he has supported millennials, one of the co-founders of Millennials for Bernie was at the gathering, and it was clear that they work together, they respect young people's voices. The young people are at the forefront of pushing for change, and we need to get behind that right away. So we have a question from Mitch. As an MP for a rural riding, how do you reach out and speak to people in my riding about the social issues that I'm so passionate about? Well, thank you for that question, Mitch. And I do want to point out that it also came up in the gathering that we need to talk about. We need to talk to rural people, not just urban people, and that that the work of organizing and building a progressive movement needs to be rural as well as urban. And they talked about oftentimes the divide and how the Republicans and Trump has really tried to appeal to rural voters who have been oftentimes pushed to the margins economically. For me, it's really important. It's really important to be clear about my principles, and I'm proud to be part of a party, the NDP, that has strong principles when it comes to social issues, when it comes to social justice, when it comes to economic justice as well. And and for me, it's important to have those conversations in my community where I come from, and I found that that a lot of people can come to the table when it comes to an issue of fundamental human rights, and I saw this early on when I ran in support of same-sex marriage, when my MP at the time was against it. There was a lot of people that said, I want my human rights respected, so I will stand by in support of LGBTQ rights. So I think it's really important that we be clear in our principles, and that we be clear in defending critical issues, critical rights like human rights. And I also think it's very important that we speak to people's feelings of marginalizations and reality of marginalization. Where I come from, we're suffering some major job losses. Thompson, Flin Flon, people across our riding. And for me, it's been very important to speak to the fact that our region feels forgotten by government, that we feel that, we, despite the wealth and the contributions that people in our regions have made, that nobody's there to support us, and that we deserve that support. We deserve the provincial government, the federal government to be there to try and find solutions. And so it's important to talk about to hear and to fight for the economic justice that rural and northern people deserve fundamentally. So that wraps up our conversation, and I really want to thank everybody for their questions and their comments. Please keep sending them. Reach out to our office. Please sign up for Progressive International. We're sharing the link. We'll be sharing the link again. There's more to come on that front. I'm certainly excited to be a big part of it, and to continue to work with progressives in our own country and around the world, and to really build up the progressive movement here in our own country, the progressive movement for political change in pursuit of the social, environmental, and economic justice we all deserve. Thank you very much. We'll be in touch.